Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We lost an unbelievably important person, at least in the United States, but I think around the world, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a Supreme Court Justice, on Friday evening. And, you know, it's been interesting, the comments and outpourings of people that have quoted some of her famous sayings, that have commented about what she meant. And I think in addition to her having a huge impact on justice within the United States, I think she also inspired a lot of people and inspired a lot of female lawyers. And so I thought that I'd reach out to some female lawyers that I know and have been on my show in the past and ask them if she meant anything to them. So we're joined tonight by Leanne Townsend, who is a family law lawyer, Saba Ahmed, who is a civil litigator, and Sarita Samaru, who is a real estate and estates lawyer. Welcome, ladies. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks for joining. So maybe I could just ask you to start with, and we'll go back in a more detail in a bit. Did Ruth Bader Ginsburg mean anything to you? And maybe Saba, I could start with you.
Thank you. Yes, Brian, of course, she meant a lot to me. I viewed her as a really important check on powers being exercised in the United States by Congress and even the executive recently. She was a progressive justice when I did my education in the United States. I got my JD from NYU Law, and so we were always reading Supreme Court decisions, and it was always her decisions that I paid specific attention to, because she was not only a woman justice on the court, but she was the most progressive person on the court. Sandra Day O'Connor was there at that time, but she was a Republican appointee. So, Ruth Bader Ginsburg stood apart. She was a defender of civil rights, women's rights, the vulnerable. And whenever I wanted to know how to think about a decision, I usually just looked at what she decided. And it really, I found that I typically agreed with her, not always. But yes, she's very well reasoned decisions and eloquent, much more than I can be in talking about her even.
Leanne, what about you?
Well, she was definitely a role model for me. She was appointed to the Supreme Court of the United States the year that I graduated law school. So definitely she's somebody I have followed throughout my legal career. I always admired her strength and her ability to fight for the things that she believed in, despite the odds, despite sometimes being at times the only woman to speak up. And, a number of her decisions were very influential. And interestingly, a lot of her dissents were also very influential. So she kind of showed that you don't always have to follow the majority in order to have influence and create change, because she did do that. As an aspiring lawyer, she definitely was somebody I looked up to, because she came from a generation when there weren't as many women practicing law as there are now. And so it's just great to have been able to see such a strong female role model.
Fantastic. Sarita, what about you?
When she was appointed, it was 1993. So I was in middle school, but I definitely was inspired by her due to her appointment from Bill Clinton. So I admired Bill Clinton when during his tenure. So I was inspired by her in the sense of if you just even read some of her decisions and some of the quotes that, as she was speaking occasionally to Congress, and what she promoted in terms of diversity, inclusion, that women could aspire and achieve. That was instrumental for myself, for someone that was aspiring to be a lawyer, even as young as I was in 1993. So that was, just equal protection clause. She constantly used that in her decisions and referred to that. So I did appreciate what she brought to the table in terms of a Supreme Court justice, and she has some very thoughtful words and thoughtful quotes that come to mind when I think of her.
It is amazing, and we probably lots of them been reproduced on Facebook and in Twitter and in newspaper articles, but the number of very profound things that she said over the years that are quotable and quote-worthy really is quite astounding. Anyway, we're chatting with three lawyers in Toronto about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, a Supreme Court justice that passed away Friday evening, about what she meant to the legal profession, to the legal prudence in the United States as well as around the world, and to I think women's rights and females aspiring to be whoever they want to be. We're going to take a break and come back in just a minute. Stay with us. Well, we're back on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. We're chatting about Ruth Bader Ginsburg and what she meant to three female lawyers that I know in Toronto. They've all been on our show before. Leanne Townsend is a family law lawyer, and she was on my show talking about some family law issues during COVID-19. Saba Ahmed is a civil litigator, and she's been on talking about race relations and some fascinating issues in regards to that. And Sarita Samaru is a real estate lawyer, and we've talked about real estate issues during COVID-19. So three very capable and articulate lawyers. And they've now wanted to come out and talk about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And I think all of them have expressed that RBG was impressionable. Where does the RBG come from? Can someone explain that? It's from a hip hop artist or a rap artist.
The Notorious B.I.G. Yes, I think she. I did see that on the news recently. Someone was explaining the source that someone decided to call her Notorious RBG instead of B.I.G. And
I thought that was kind of cute that she gets called that because of a hip hop artist or rap artist.
Yeah, it really took off.
And also, I've always loved the depictions of her on Saturday Night Live. I'm sure some of you have seen those, but she has become almost this cult figure over the years, which is kind of interesting. And some of the speeches that she's made to commencement exercises, graduation exercises, etc., have been very impressionable. Sam, I wonder if you could mention one or two of the cases that or decisions or dissents that you think have been most impactful.
I found it interesting that everyone's talking about how she was a great defender of women's rights, but I think she had usually a pretty strong opinion on pretty much all of the cases where she wrote an opinion. And I guess I first thought about the Violence Against Women's Act case, which was called U.S. v. Morrison. I mean, she didn't actually author that decision, but it was a Commerce Clause case, so it's about whether or not the federal government has the right to legislate across interstate boundaries, and if it affects interstate commerce, that's when they have that kind of jurisdiction. And the majority decided no, and Ginsburg joined the dissent. And I felt that that was a really good example of the kinds of cases that are getting struck down because we have a very divided court, divided along partisan lines. Now, that wasn't a Ginsburg authored decision, but it typifies the kinds of bipartisanship that you see in the court. Sometimes they're quite aligned and you see unanimous decisions, but obviously Bush v. Gore is one that really stands out from the year 2000, where I felt that she was the only judge who really gave a principled decision, and her dissent, she was quite clear that the Equal Protection Clause really didn't come into play. It wouldn't be triggered by Florida voters. Usually, in order to have an equal protection clause being triggered, you need to have a discrete and insular minority, which was always considered to be people of color, people who have immutable characteristics and that sort of thing. And that just didn't even figure when you're talking about Florida voters. And then
hold on a second. So remind us if you could. So Bush versus Gore was the decision to end the election recounts effectively, and you're saying that that the case was based on something regards to minority?
There were two main issues. I guess one was about the Equal Protection Clause. It treats because some votes would get discarded by the method that was being proposed by Florida for counting their own votes, that was denied the equal protection of the laws to some of those voters whose votes were being discarded. But that wasn't a kind of a discrimination. That was just sort of a side effect of having some discarded votes. So the idea that they, in a very unprincipled way, started to treat Florida voters like they were like black people who can't change their characteristics, or women who, like that was never a protected group, and there was no analysis. And then I think the Justice Ginsburg also chimed in on the second issue, which was very much about states' rights. Do the states have the right to determine how to count their own votes? And in that case, you saw all the conservative judges who are always about states' rights departing from that kind of analysis, and they're substituting their own decision for the decision of the Florida judges and legislators there. And she even said, actually, I did write down a quote. She said, I might join the Chief Justice or at my commission to interpret Florida law, but disagreement with the Florida court's interpretation of its own state law does not warrant the conclusion that the justices of that court have legislated. And she went on to say, there is no intrinsic reason why the fact that a man is a federal judge should make him more competent or conscientious or learned with respect to federal law than his neighbor in the state courthouse. And she also said, rarely has this court rejected outright an interpretation of state law by a state high court. And that's what they did in that case. So she really called out her colleagues on the bench for departing from their own jurisprudence on states' rights, and that really drew it into focus for me.
And it was noteworthy on that case because she wrote, I dissent, and the common practice was to say, I dissent respectfully, and she left off the word respectfully just to really make her point.
Fantastic. So when people interrupt saying with all due respect, I guess that she did not have due respect.
Even though she was very close friends with Scalia, I understood that they enjoyed the opera together. She was a really big opera fan, and they played golf together. And that was something that really always captivated me about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, because she seemed to have a kind of diplomacy that I don't have. She was able to get along with people in a way that I don't know if I could have enjoyed opera or played
opera with someone that you disagree with completely, so much so that you don't even respectfully disagree with them.
So strongly. But, I never met Scalia, so maybe there are times when I read his opinions and that it really does seem to me like there's just a difference in gestalt, right? And it's interesting, and I love searching out those kinds of tensions, and I guess she did too, and that's why she really enjoyed debating with him. He was a textualist kind of jurist. He really believed in, so he said, going back to the strict construction of a statute, the words of a statute, that's very much how you should decide what the law is as a judge, and Ruth Bader Ginsburg was not that kind of a judge. She was much more principled, a lot of respect for stare decisis. And just to talk about one more decision, it would have to be the June medical case, which I found to be quite interesting very recently in 2020. This was the case where the Supreme Court refused to strike down they did strike down as unconstitutional laws in the state of Louisiana that would restrict access to abortion. Now, the reason why I find this case interesting is that I fully expected that we would lose because the bench was already pretty conservative. And when I looked at the judges and who would be deciding this case, I was like, well, it's 5-4 against us. We're not going to win. But Chief Justice Roberts, who's a Republican appointee, he broke ranks and he decided in favor, he joined along with Ruth Bader Ginsburg and the other more progressive judges that you can't restrict access to abortion. Now, he said it's not that he doesn't think that, he agreed with, he dissented in the previous decision where a very similar law was not struck down, and he was a dissent on that one. So you'd expect him to say, oh, well, now's my chance. I'm going to right my wrong because this decision has come up again. But he said, no, you have to follow precedent. And the Latin term is stare decisis, which basically means that you have to defer to what has been decided before in order for there to be consistency in the law, so that like cases are decided alike. And he said, I'm just not going to go back and rewrite what we did in that other case, because I'm going to defer to our jurisprudence. And because of his decision to do that, that particular decision wasn't overturned. And I just have to wonder if it isn't because of these more progressive, the persuasive powers of these more progressive judges who say, you can't be flipping, flopping all over the place. And I wonder, like that decision to me, losing Ruth Bader Ginsburg after June Medical, like what's to stop that case from getting decided wrongly next time? And it will. I think we've lost abortion rights in the United States. Those protections are gone.
Sarita and Leanne, any decisions or dissents that are meaningful to you?
Well, one of the ones that stands out to me was United States versus Virginia Military Institute, where she actually wrote the decision for the majority. It was a situation where the school was, had an exclusively male student policy, and the court ruled, they ended up striking down that policy as it's being discriminatory, and she wrote the decision for the court. So in my view, that was an important decision. I also wanted to touch back on something that Saba had said when she was talking about Ruth Bader Ginsburg, golfing with Justice Scalia and things like that. I think that maybe that was one of the things that, was part of her success, is that she was able to, get along, have her professional differences of opinion, but still, get along with people who had a different opinion. And, one of her famous quotes that I shared even on my Facebook was, fight for the things that you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you. And I think, that's part of her magic, is that, her persuasive powers and her gift with words and her eloquence was what, she was able to use to persuade people of her viewpoint. And, and it was done in such a respectful, intellectual, way that, she didn't have to resort to maybe unprofessional conduct or different tactics, for lack of a better way of putting it, in order to get her, opinion heard and have influence. Another decision, I don't recall the name of it, but I can pull it up if I need to. It's one involving same-sex marriage, and the Supreme Court ruled in favor of same-sex marriage, and she really put the lawyers to the test in terms of questions she asked and points that she made about why shouldn't gay people have the same rights as other people. And it's it was often thought that the way that she questioned and came out against the lawyers who were arguing against same-sex marriage, that she did have an influence on just public opinion generally on the issue.
Yeah, I think that's called Obergefell.
That's right. That's the decision.
Sarita, any that you want to mention?
Yeah, there was one, Ledbetter versus Goodyear, which rejected pay discrimination on a technicality, and that actually pushed Barack Obama to institute in 2009 equality in pay for women. So that one I think was instrumental, especially in the United States, where there was essentially that gap between men and women in terms of pay, and it still is to this day. I still believe in that even within Canada, but that one I think was instrumental. And then again, the notable one was the Virginia just in terms of admitting women into the military, just, essentially just being an advocate for women's rights and being a huge hero in the LGBT community. I think that she was instrumental in kind of pushing everyone forward. And I think my concern is her replacement. I mean, who will be her replacement at this point in time? And it looks as though they're kind of rushing to get a replacement at this time. And they're saying that they should just be respectful in terms of, respecting her funeral and having some time pass. But it appears that Trump is in a hurry to get a replacement in. And he says he will appoint a woman. But the question is who and what type of conservatism will she be in favor of. So and after all this hard work, 87 years of I mean, not all 87 years, but it seems like majority of her life and her career has been advocating for women's rights and just in general for equality. And one of my favorite quotes, which I'm just going to pull up, was she said, "Generalizations about the way women are, estimates of what is appropriate for most women no longer justify denying opportunity to women whose talent and capacity place them outside of the average description." So I absolutely love that quote. So I'm hoping that her replacement will carry forward some of her values.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit, the politics of what's going to happen with the Supreme Court after we take a break. We're chatting with Leanne Townsend, Saba Ahmed, and Sarita Samaru, three lawyers in Toronto. We're going to take a break and come back with more in just a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. We're chatting with Leanne Townsend. She is a family lawyer in Toronto. Leanne, what firm are you with?
Brody Thorning, LLP.
Thank you. And Saba Ahmed, who is a civil litigator, and I also serve on a couple different boards with Saba. She's very involved in the charitable sector and the activist sector. Saba, you run your own firm?
That's right.
And what's civil litigation? Anything I want to get mad about someone about?
Anytime you need to go to court in a dispute over money, that's sort of what I do.
Oh, okay. And Sarita Samaru, and it's S something law?
SST Law Professional Corporation. Yes.
SST Law Professional Corporation. And you specialize in real estate and trusts, I understand.
Yes, and wills and estates, correct.
And wills and estates, okay. And so all three of you are in different areas, which is kind of fun. And all three of you have been motivated and inspired by Ruth Bader Ginsburg, which is kind of interesting. I think she did inspire a lot of females and a lot of people generally. Why? Why do you think?
Well, I think she was very influential and very eloquent in what she said. And I mean, I've often heard that, I'm of an older generation, but I've heard that millennials in particular connected with a lot of her judgments and dissents and a lot of the things that she stood for. And so I think the fact that she appealed to so many people in that bracket has, really, the fact that she resonated with them, says a lot that she really was in touch with current times and the way people are thinking nowadays.
There's this picture that probably you've seen, and I don't even know whether it was Harvard Law School or Columbia Law School, but she's the only female in a sea of white men that's her graduating class from the law school, and she's this tiny little thing at the end of the row. She said, and I'm not quoting, I'm paraphrasing, but she said that the fact that she was female, that she was Jewish, that she had challenges getting her first job, that after she graduated from Columbia Law, she was married. And Jewish, and a lot of the corporate law firms in Manhattan wouldn't hire her, wouldn't even look at her. She said that that challenge influenced her. Do you think that's true?
Yeah, well, of course. She had a really interesting story. She was at Harvard, and then in her final year, her husband got a job in New York City, so she wanted to just do her final year at Columbia and still have a Harvard law degree, and they wouldn't let her do that. They would let other students do that, but not her. So she went to Columbia, and then she couldn't get a job at any firm, even the little ones, and she had to end up teaching at Rutgers, which for someone at the top of her class, and she wasn't just at the top of her class. When she was in, I think, second year or first year, her husband had cancer, and he wasn't able to go to his classes. So she had to go to her classes and his classes and take notes for his classes and help him write his papers because he was in bed, and they had a child, and she was doing it all. And she graduated at the top, and she still couldn't get a job. And people were quite clear when she was, I mean, I'm basing this actually on that movie, On the Basis of Sex. The day that she died, I was so sad. I said, let's watch this on Netflix or whatever. We bought it actually, I guess, on one of those services, and it was I mean, to the extent that if they didn't take any liberties with that with those details, it was just really amazing back in the 40s, I guess, that, you know, there was just no credibility if you're a woman. You couldn't get a credit card in your own name, you couldn't do anything. And even when she was trying to litigate issues that were important to her later on, it was really hard for her to get support until she started to win and gain notoriety because of her brilliance. So she got there not from any privilege. She got to where she got only
hard work and
hard work
smartness.
and brilliance.
And from, you know, I don't know this, but from a lot of the commentators, she would have been a renowned lawyer, even if she hadn't been appointed to the Supreme Court. That some of the cases she argued in front of the Supreme Court as a lawyer were very impactful, and some of the things she wrote as a professor of law were incredibly impactful. So she was a good lawyer, she was a good professor, and she was a great Supreme Court justice.
Definitely.
Just out of interest, you know, she was one of maybe 30, so you know, not 1%, but maybe 5% of her class was female. What percentage of each of your classes was female in law school? Leanne, what percentage of your class was female? Any idea?
I mean, I think it was probably around 50%, if not close to that.
Saba?
I think it was less than half. And as you go to the firms and up the ranks, the women, you know, they stop figuring.
Why?
Structural barriers, I would say. I mean, you know, it used to be very clear that you wouldn't be playing golf with the men. It wasn't, you know, you just don't have the ability to be a rainmaker with the kinds of clientele that those male firms already have, right? So it's just hard to compete, to make rain in the same ways that the networking happens for the men. So I think that's one factor. And then when you take a break for childcare or anything like that, it really reflects negatively on your credit. It doesn't look good when you tell a white male that you've got to take time off for the baby or whatever. So you've got to hide it. And it's just, I think there's a lot of structural barriers. And, you know, Ruth Bader Ginsburg did talk about how those two spheres of her life, work and family, were periods of respite from one another, and she found them to be quite complementary. And I did find that as well when I was raising my baby in law school. I had him right around the time of the Bush v. Gore decision. That was when I became a mother in the winter of my first year. And then it was very easy to manage law school with children, but firm life and children, if I didn't have to, it was a lot harder.
Sarita, what about you? What percentage of your graduating class was female?
Mine was a little bit higher. So I think, I mean, I was there, you know, between, you know, the late 2000s. And so it was, I would say it was closer to 65, almost 70-30, to be honest. I actually saw a lot more women in law school, which was fantastic. So,
So law school has changed dramatically from the era of Ruth Bader Ginsburg being at school. Whether they've got to the top is a different story. So, you know, we have one female on the Supreme Court. Is that true in Canada?
No, there's a couple. Abella is a woman. Karakatsanis is a woman, Cote is a woman, and Martin is a woman. So it's four women.
Okay. What about the United States?
They have Sotomayor. And now that Justice Ginsburg is gone, I think Kagan is a woman, right?
So two. So 2 of 8 in the United States and 4 of 8 in Canada?
Right.
Shows our value system.
Yeah. Well, I mean, actually, our Cote and Karakatsanis were both appointed by Harper. And you know, what's interesting is they're both Harper appointees. One of them is almost always in the majority, and the other one is almost always in the dissent. Cote is known as the great dissenter, and Karakatsanis is known as, you know, the most majoritarian of the members of the court. So you can see that they don't agree with one another a lot.
Now, Beverly McLaughlin, is that correct? Beverly McLaughlin? Justice Beverly McLaughlin?
A few years ago.
Yes.
I've had a couple of people say that she inspired them almost as much as Ruth Bader Ginsburg, I guess, because she was one of the first, was she the first Canadian female Supreme Court Justice, or certainly one of the most renowned?
Yeah, I think she was. She might have been the first, but don't quote me on that.
Either. She's definitely the most renowned, I think, in some respects, but I'm not sure if she was the first.
So it was being female, being Jewish, and not getting a job. And so it was all of those things that she suggested, based on what I've read, that sort of motivated her. Saba, you're Muslim. Has that been a challenge for you in the legal profession?
It's been an advantage at sometimes, actually, but yeah, it was a bit of a problem. I remember being on I was definitely subjected to religiously hostile, you know, a really weird situation, actually, just in the summer before I got hired, where I had to listen to someone say some very Islamophobic things directly to my face, which was, you know, very strange. And I turned to him and I said, you know, I'm just so surprised that you would say this to me knowing that I'm a Muslim. And he gave me this look and he said, you're a Muslim? And he did a about face and he turned away. And I was like, well, what do you think with my name? Like, you know, so yeah, it was a very strange thing. But that was the only thing that I really noticed directly. But, you know, you can sort of figure that sometimes you're getting discriminated against, but you don't know why. You know, you can never tell if it's sexism or racism or Islamophobia, you know, or anti-Canadian sentiment. You know, I was in the United States when I started practicing.
I got that. I went to school and worked in the United States. And if I ever spelt color wrong according to them, or pronounced about a boot or something like that. And when I said niche versus niche, oh my God, they reacted negatively.
For me, the word was composite. They were saying it's the composite index. It's, you know, and I was saying composite, and you know, someone reamed me out for that and thought I was uneducated, and it was very strange. Yeah.
Well, I had a bunch of Army people in my class at Harvard Business School, and if I ever said lieutenant, let me tell you, they would be really freaked out. What about you, Sarita? Did you ever encounter racism?
Again, it's similar to what Saba had mentioned. It might be kind of a little bit more discreet and indirect. So, I mean, I did notice, you know, the hire back from my firm. So I worked at a large Bay Street firm. I summarized an article there. And around hire back time, it was notable in terms of who was hired back and who wasn't. I had worked the same long hours and put in the same amount of effort. So it was notable then, but again, you know, being the personality that I am, I didn't let that bother me, you know, to just carry on. And, you know, as Saba mentioned, you know, just being a woman and a mother, I mean, I opened up my practice right after articling. I was 5 months pregnant with my daughter when I opened my practice and went back to work after 6 weeks. So I didn't let any of that stand in my way. And if anything, now I refer the same partners work from my office. So, you know, and again, I've stayed in touch with many of them that were very supportive. But yeah, you could see there was a divide. You could see that there were some barriers present. And I think, you know, I commend the Law Society of Ontario for creating an equity and diversity and inclusion program and just trying to bring that to the forefront, to bring that to the attention of lawyers who may not even realize it's happening within their firms or, you know, in present circumstances. And there's been a lot of opposition to it, but I do believe it was necessary. You know, it's very uncomfortable to talk about racism, bias, and gender equality, but I think we need to have those uncomfortable discussions amongst you know, the bar. So,
but it seems like for Ruth Bader Ginsburg, the fact that she was discriminated against, and that she was in this dramatic minority. Not, each one of you has been in a law school that seems like it was half and half or close to it. So she was in this dramatic minority, and then she had this big challenge of being hired, and whether it was religious or sex or what, she ended up being a fighter for minority rights the rest of her life, and every minority, not just one minority. It was certainly women's rights, but also, as you mentioned, Sarita, LGBT rights and voting rights, etc. So, what creates this progressive attitude for a judge? Do you think is it experiences? Is it education? Is it the way you're raised? It can't be genetic. What is it?
It's partly education, but I kind of think she's also coming from a Jewish tradition, and I really noticed the difference between American and Canadian jurisprudence is in part the influence of Jewish jurists who somewhat learn. I don't know for sure if this is appropriate to say, but it seems to me that they take some of their theological training and their approach to interpreting the Talmud, for example, and they apply it to American law. So they're very interested in the textualist. You have to follow the rules, the analytic rigor, and then the analogizing and distinguishing that they do. And it seems to be coming from the Jewish tradition. And then the actual values, well, I think that those must be American to some extent, but I find that we are much more, if WASPy is an okay word to use, I do mean the white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, it's up to the individual, I'll figure it out, we all know. Well, when you don't have these rules, you're much more likely to be biased and treat like cases differently. And so I saw that in her, the analytic rigor. Now you can use that kind of analytic rigor to achieve conservative ends as well as progressive ends, but I just noticed more so that amongst the jurists, like, when you're thinking about someone like Justice Posner, they're very, very rigorous, very clear, concise, and also humane. There's this thread of humanity, and especially after World War II, Jewish intellectuals were really leading progressive movements across many disciplines, and the law was not exempt, and I felt that was coming through her writings in particular.
How can you have confidence in the law when so many things are decided on a partisan basis?
Well, I don't think that it has historically been the way it's been in the United States. I mean, bipartisanship has increased recently. We used to have most legislation in the United States used to be the result of efforts across the aisle. They used to get buy-in from the other parties, and people were trying to make sure that the laws made sense to both parties, and that gave the public confidence.
But I'm not talking about Congress or the Senate. I'm talking about.
I'm leading up.
I'm talking about the court. The court is not bipartisan. The court is partisan.
But once you stopped having bipartisan, when you started having bipartisan legislation where one party was opposed to, you ended up increasing the Supreme Court's power, because suddenly they're trying to decide the validity of a law that was passed without support of the other party. And that's when their political stripes show more. And they ended up with all this power, which was unchecked. Right? It's unchecked power. There's no one, if the Supreme Court decides they decide something and they decide it a certain way, that's it. It's the law. And unless a government is ready to go after that institution, that's the law. And so it became politicized in part because of the rise of bipartisanship. It wasn't always the way. I mean, Rehnquist, a lot of these, like Brown v. Board of Education, right? One of the most progressive, important decisions, ending segregation. That was Chief Justice Warren's decision. It was unanimous, right? And it was going against a little board, but federal legislation, that wasn't subject to those kinds of huge challenges. That legislation had historically been much less divisive than what we've got now. I mean, we have, the Violence Against Women's Act that I was talking about before. That was something that, wasn't popular across the aisle.
Chatting tonight with Leanne Townsend and Saba Ahmed and Sarita Samaru, three lawyers here in Toronto, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. We're going to take a break and come back with some concluding comments from each one of them in just a minute. Stay with us. What a fascinating conversation I'm having tonight with Leanne Townsend, Saba Ahmed, and Sarita Samaru, a states lawyer, Sarita, a civil litigator, Saba, and a family law lawyer, Leanne, about Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And, we talked about how, Saba, how this court is becoming more partisan. And it sounds like Trump is going to elect is going to nominate a conservative justice. Sounds like it might be a female, very conservative justice from Chicago. Assuming, let's not talk about whether it's going to happen or not, but assuming that a conservative justice gets appointed, what do you think is going to happen in Roe v. Wade? Is abortion rights at risk?
Absolutely. It's all Burwell v. Hobby Lobby, birth control, all of those. That case was already lost. Yeah, we're going to lose a lot of.
What about this argument rights. That you say that Roberts said that you have to agree to precedent? You don't think, based on the precedent, that this has been the law for the last 40 years, that it's going to continue?
Now he's outnumbered. I mean, if we get another Gorsuch or Kavanaugh or Thomas, then there's just no way. I mean, Alito is not going to be the vanguard. He's not as reasonable as Roberts, and Roberts is in no way a progressive person. Even Ginsburg wasn't totally progressive in all of her decisions. She voted against some important environmental cases recently that had a lot of people upset. But yeah, it's terrible. We're going to lose a lot of rights.
What about the Affordable Care Act? I understand that's at risk as well. Leanne?
I think that's at risk as well, along with Roe v. Wade. I think that's one of the things we do better here in Canada. Our court process isn't as politicized as it is in the U.S., and so I think some of these cases, and some of these rights that have been in place for a long time in some cases, they are at risk if a very conservative judge is appointed, by the Trump administration in the short term.
They also think that it's important because this is going to be helpful to Trump on election results. Can any of you, Sarita, or any of you explain what the issue is here? Like, they're talking about the justices might disavow some late mail-in votes or something?
I'm not fully aware of that, but I definitely think, it will be affecting his votes, like in terms of who he selects. If he selects someone overly conservative, that certainly will be an issue for him. But I'm not fully aware of the mail-in votes. Not sure if Saba might know a little bit more on that.
Well, if there are any issues that require the Supreme Court's intervention, and he's already picked his next nominee, the next justice, then they will be inclined to vote in his favor, just as they did on Bush v. Gore. It was very much on partisan lines, and these are pretty young judges. There's no mandatory retirement like we have in Canada, so this new judge is likely going to be locked in for quite a long time, and we just don't have the numbers to get reasonable decisions. You're going to get unreasonable decisions, and if you look at the jurisprudence of Alito and Thomas and Scalia, Gorsuch, these are very, very conservative. They're not. I mean, Roberts is the big moderate. I mean, even by Canadian standards, even Ruth Bader Ginsburg isn't really all that moderate. She, the Affordable Care Act, the Obamacare, there was a decision about that where part of it was invalidated. And I think Ginsburg, don't quote me on it, I think she voted along with the repeal of that. No, she didn't vote on that one part, but 4.4 million Americans lost their coverage because of that one little decision. This is an enormously influential body.
On Friday night, and then on Saturday, and then on Sunday, there were thousands of people laying flowers at the Supreme Court in the United States. Have we ever seen that for Supreme Court justice before?
No, never.
It's almost like Princess Diana kind of emotional connection.
What's the last check?
I think she had humble beginnings as well. If you read about her story too, she had lost her mother quite young during her high school years, and that was her inspiration. So, and I think what I really admire about her, when I was kind of listening to some of her recordings prior to this one, and she said, she had a husband that was quite supportive her ambitions and her endeavors. Like, you know, despite the fact that he had his own ambitions in law school and all that, he was constantly in her corner, on her side. And I actually heard an interview from Hillary Clinton about that, that, you know, that the one thing that we can say is that she constantly had support on her end from her family. So I think that's crucial in recognizing, and then also her humble beginnings as well as, and she'd always recognize where she came from. So I think that was instrumental in a lot of her decision making and her thought process.
Well, Sarita Samaru, a state's lawyer. Sorry, Leanne, you wanted to say something final?
She's actually like a pop culture icon is what she really became. So I think that's as well why there's so much attention on her passing.
Leanne Townsend, a family law lawyer, Saba Ahmed, a civil litigator, and Sarita Samaru, a real estate and estates lawyer. Thank you so much for joining me and telling me what Ruth Bader Ginsburg meant to you. Really appreciate it. Well, that's our show for tonight. Thanks for joining us. Brian Crombie on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Good night, everybody.